remember standing on a stage many years ago as a young man with a dream in my heart and fear in my eyes. At the time, I had no idea how to balance my aspirations with the pull of temptations all around me. I felt the constant noise of the world, people telling me who I ought to be, what I ought to chase, how quickly I ought to move. But in the stillness of my own spirit, I sensed a deeper calling, a voice, if you will, whispering that I was meant for something more meaningful than superficial applause. That whisper was God's truth, beckoning me to trust in the path set before me instead of the distractions swirling around. Now I want to invite you into that same space, to listen for the quiet guiding voice in your life, a voice that says, you are created with purpose, and God's truth can carry you through any worldly chaos. Some of you might be wondering, well, how do I know what God's truth is? How do I tune out the distractions? Why should I even care? I get it. Life comes at us fast. We have obligations, families to feed, bills to pay, educational goals, career ambitions. So much is pulling at us. And in a world that's constantly demanding our attention, it can feel almost impossible to pause long enough to hear what really matters. Yet here you are, listening, curious, searching, or maybe just a little bit hopeful. That's enough of a start. Because the moment we become aware that we're caught in the rush of worldly noise is the same moment we can choose a different rhythm, a divine pace, grounded in something far more substantial than the next internet trend or the next material desire. I'm reminded of a time when I was fresh off a big break. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Everyone wanted a piece of me. Folks said, Denzel, you made it. Keep going. Don't slow down. But while that success felt rewarding, I also noticed how easy it was to lose touch with my spiritual grounding. Whenever I drifted away from God's truth, it was like stepping off solid ground onto shaky sand. I discovered that if I didn't deliberately seek God, I'd be swept away by the current of everybody else's agenda. And I'm not the only one. You don't have to be in show business to know the feeling. Students feel it when grades and peer pressure swallow them whole. Parents feel it when they try to juggle work, responsibilities at home, and the nagging sense they should do more. Entrepreneurs feel it when business competition and financial pressures overshadow their original vision. It's universal. What I learned and what I want to share with you is that there's immense power in deciding to embrace the truth that God has for you instead of letting the world dictate your worth. The question is, are we ready to do the work? Are we ready to change our priorities, our habits, our day-to-day decisions to align with something more eternal? Because God's truth is not just some lofty, airy concept. It's practical. It's transformative. It shapes your thoughts, your conversations, and eventually your destiny. By the end of our time together, my hope is that you'll feel not just uplifted, but inspired to take real steps, 7 meaningful practices, to ensure that God's truth becomes the foundation you stand on, no matter how loud the world gets. I pose a challenge to you right now. Dare to let go of the noise. Dare to believe that within God's eternal perspective, there lies a blueprint for real growth in your personal life, in your relationships, and in your community. The question is, will you turn the volume down on all those distractions just long enough to hear that truth? Will you hold on to it when the pressure intensifies? My guess is, if you're still listening, part of you is saying, yes, I want that. I'm tired of feeling torn in a million different directions. I want something solid. Well, you've come to the right place. Let's explore what it means to embrace God's truth over worldly distractions so you can step out of here tonight or tomorrow, or whenever you watch this, and say, I'm ready. I've got the tools. I'm taking the next step. That next step starts now. Let me tell you about how I discovered the first key principle that shaped my life. When we fix our hearts on God, our goals, our ambitions, and even our struggles take on new meaning. Early in my career, I was chasing big roles, chasing opportunities. I pray, but sometimes my prayer sounded more like a list of demands than a heart-to-heart conversation with my Creator. I'd say, God, please let me land this part. Let me win this award. Let me prove. And though there's nothing wrong with having a vision and praying for favor, I realized over time that my motivation was skewed. I was too focused on the worldly measure of success. One day I asked myself, who am I doing this for? Was it for God's glory or my own ego? That's when I started learning the first practice, daily realignment with your why. The truth is, if we don't take the time to ask ourselves who we serve, it's all too easy to serve ourselves first and foremost. When I say daily realignment, I mean taking a quiet moment, maybe first thing in the morning, maybe before you close your eyes at night, to remind yourself that your gifts aren't just for personal gain. They're for contributing something good, something healing, something uplifting in this world. For a high school student, that might mean pausing during study sessions to remember that your education can be used to serve a higher purpose than just getting a job offer. For a parent, it might be checking your heart as you guide your children, making sure you're not letting exhaustion or frustration overshadow the love and faith you're meant to pass along. For a business leader, it could be reevaluating your company's goals, ensuring you're not just chasing profit, but also creating positive change. When we realign daily, we tap into a power source that never runs dry, God's perspective. Here's the reality. You can't realign if you don't slow down. And that's a struggle for most of us. The world tells us to keep moving, keep accumulating, keep striving. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pause. You quiet all that external chatter and tune in. That stillness is where God's voice resides. It's not always loud. It's often a gentle nudge, a soft correction, an encouraging whisper. When you experience that whisper, you'll see your daily tasks with new eyes. You'll discern which opportunities are worth your energy and which are mere distractions. You'll discover which friendships push you toward growth and which ones keep you stuck. Daily realignment is like recalibrating your spiritual compass so that you're always heading north, even if temptations or obstacles try to nudge you off course. I remember a moment on a film set. The pressure was on and emotions were high. Everyone was tired, the days were long. In the midst of that tension, I realized I hadn't had a moment of prayer or reflection in days. I felt restless, short-tempered. So I found a quiet corner, closed my eyes, and asked God to help me center myself again. It was just a few minutes, but it shifted my entire mood. Suddenly, I remembered why I was there, not just to deliver lines, but to be a vessel for a story that could touch someone's heart. And the difference that made, well, it was evident in my performance, my attitude, my interactions with the cast and crew. That's the power of daily realignment with God's truth. The second meaningful practice is this: feed your soul more than your ego. We feed our bodies 3 times a day, sometimes more. But how often do we feed our souls? We're so conditioned to check our phones, scroll social media, tune into every bit of bad news, gossip, or meaningless chatter. We feed our egos with likes, with compliments, with more and more achievements. But our souls remain hungry for real nourishment, wisdom, love, compassion, understanding, and a sense of divine purpose. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time you intentionally picked up a scripture, a devotional, or even just a thought-provoking book or conversation that made your spirit come alive? For me, feeding my soul involves reading my Bible, listening to inspiring messages, and having real, honest conversations with people who challenge me to grow in faith. I remember one conversation with a mentor who saw right through my pride. He gently said, Denzel, you know your gift is from God, right? You didn't manufacture this by yourself. So use it wisely, steward it well, and always keep yourself humble. That was a turning point for me because it forced me to acknowledge that my talents weren't a personal trophy, but a tool for a higher purpose. When you feed your soul, you learn to value humility over vanity, faith over fear, and service over selfishness. Your decisions start to reflect an eternal perspective rather than momentary validation. Now, a common struggle many of us face is consistency. We start off strong, and then the busyness of life takes over, or we face a crisis that knocks us sideways. That's why it's essential to set practical routines for spiritual nourishment. If you're a morning person, wake up a little earlier to reflect, pray, or read something that inspires you. If you're a night owl, carve out that late hour space. Make it a routine, just as you schedule meals. Think of it as soul food time. And it doesn't have to be hours. 10 or 15 minutes can transform your outlook for the whole day. It's a reminder that your worth isn't found in the passing applause of social media or the next big promotion, but in the unshakable truth that you are a beloved child of God. The third practice goes hand in hand with the second. Surround yourself with faith-filled community. Whether you're 15 or 50, isolation is a dangerous game. We weren't built to walk this journey alone. In my own life, having people who speak truth and love into my existence has been crucial. These are the individuals who aren't impressed by my resume or my achievements. They care about my character, my integrity, my growth. They'll call me out if they see me drifting and encourage me if they see me struggling. When I was a young actor, there were so many directions I could have gone. But it was the presence of mentors, church friends, and family members grounded in faith that helped me stay on course. It doesn't matter if you're living in a tiny town or a bustling city, seek out those connections. It could be a small group at church, an online community of believers, a trusted circle of friends who align with godly values. Why is this important? Because when life gets tough, and it will, you need people who remind you where your true strength comes from. When discouragement tries to creep in, you need folks who say, "Don't give up. God's got you." When your sense of direction falters, you need them to lovingly steer you back to the truth. Even in a professional setting, having colleagues or mentors who share your core values can make all the difference in how you handle ethical challenges or moral dilemmas. This kind of community isn't about exclusivity. It's about nurturing each other's faith so that we all stand stronger against the waves of worldly distraction. Let me transition to the fourth practice, developing spiritual resilience through gratitude. Now, I can't emphasize enough how powerful gratitude is. We often focus on what we lack, what we haven't achieved, or what went wrong. But when we learn to adopt an attitude of gratitude, thanking God not just for the big blessings, but for the small, everyday graces, we strengthen our spiritual backbone. Gratitude changes the lens through which you see your experiences. Instead of feeling entitled, you feel humbled and enriched. Instead of complaining about obstacles, you see them as opportunities to grow and rely on God. It's a spiritual muscle that, once exercised regularly, helps you bounce back from disappointments faster. I recall a time when a project I'd poured my heart into didn't gain the traction I expected. I was upset and questioning my path. A close friend reminded me to pause and list what I was thankful for: my health, my family, my ability to even pursue my passion, the connections I'd formed, the lessons I'd learned. As I did that, my heart shifted from frustration to gratitude. Suddenly, that failed project wasn't a symbol of defeat, but a stepping stone to future success. When you train your mind to see God's hand in every situation, you become more resilient. Discouragement might knock at your door, but it won't make a permanent home in your life. Over time, you develop a strong sense of peace, even in the face of adversity. That kind of peace can only come from recognizing that God's truth is bigger than your current setbacks. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the fifth practice. Act on faith, not on fear. Fear is one of the biggest worldly distractions there is. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not fitting in, fear of losing what we have. It's a powerful emotion that can paralyze us if we let it. And let me tell you, I've felt that fear. Before stepping onto a stage or accepting a challenging role, there have been moments of intense anxiety. What if I mess up? What if people don't like it? What if I'm not good enough? Yet time and time again, God has reminded me that faith is the antidote to fear. Now, faith isn't a magic wand that guarantees everything goes our way. Rather, it's a decision to trust that God's plan is good, even if the road is bumpy. In my youth, I saw fear cripple folks who had potential far greater than mine. They would talk about their dreams, but they never took action. Fear told them, it's too risky. You might fail. People might laugh. I learned something crucial. Taking one small step in faith is more powerful than standing still in fear. If you've ever felt God nudging you to apply for that scholarship, start that new project, or reconcile with someone you've been avoiding, trust that nudge. Even if you don't see the full picture yet, step out. God honors that obedience. And in that step, you'll often find your path unfolding in ways you never imagined. Acting on faith means you're willing to do what doesn't always make sense in worldly terms. Because the world might say, look out for yourself first. But God's truth says, have courage, stand for righteousness, and I'll be with you. Now, let's weave in our sixth practice. Cultivate a servant's heart. The world can be so self-centered. We're taught to focus on our own achievements, our own brand, our own comfort. Yet Jesus himself set the perfect example of humility and service. Cultivating a servant's heart doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. It means that in your leadership, in your friendships, and your family life, you approach others with compassion and a willingness to help. When I visit community organizations or talk to young folks trying to find their way, I often encourage them to volunteer or simply offer a helping hand. There's something that changes inside of us when we put others first in a genuine way. Our perspective broadens, our hearts soften. I've met multimillionaires who feel empty inside because they never learned the joy of service. On the flip side, I've met ordinary folks with limited resources who live with an unshakable sense of purpose because they make it a habit to give what they can, time, talent, or treasure, to uplift someone else. That's God's economy. When you serve, you're actually the one who ends up richer in spirit. How can you incorporate this practice? Start small. Offer to help a neighbor, mentor a teenager, cook a meal for someone going through a hard time. These acts of service become daily reminders that we're all connected and that living by God's truth is about more than just personal gain. Finally, we come to the seventh meaningful practice: rest in God's promises. This one sounds simple, but it's profound. We live in a world that glorifies hustle, work 24/7, never sleep, chase after everything. But God's truth invites us into Sabbath, into rest, into a space where we say, Lord, I trust you enough to pause. I trust you enough to stop striving for a moment, to recharge, to soak in your presence. Resting in God's promises means you actively resist the pressure to do it all in your own strength. You're saying, God, I believe you are who you say you are. I believe you will provide for me, guide me, and comfort me. Therefore, I can step back from the hamster wheel of constant motion. I've learned this lesson in some tough ways. There were times I burned the candle at both ends, juggling multiple projects without a break. I was exhausted, physically and spiritually. It wasn't until I took a step back and honored rest, both the physical kind and the spiritual kind, that I began to experience true renewal. Sometimes, resting in God's promises can look like taking a day off from the grind, to meditate on Scripture, to pray, to enjoy nature, to spend real quality time with family. Other times it means letting go of that internal worry, what if things don't work out, and replacing it with, God, I trust you to lead me. When we do this, we discover a peace that surpasses understanding. It's not laziness, it's divine surrender, an acknowledgement that we aren't the ultimate controllers of our destiny. God is. Now let's tie these 7 practices together under a larger perspective. We live in a time when distractions abound. Worldly influences pull us in every direction. The demands of social media, the pressures of success, the comparisons with others. These can all erode our sense of self and our relationship with God if we let them. But by choosing daily realignment, feeding our souls, surrounding ourselves with faith-filled community, practicing gratitude, acting on faith rather than fear, cultivating a servant's heart, and resting in God's promises, we equip ourselves with the spiritual armor needed to navigate this world without losing sight of the eternal. Each of these practices, taken individually, can make a difference. Together, they become a transformative path. They help us break free from the cycle of chasing after empty pursuits and anchor us in the knowledge that we are guided by a truth that transcends time and trends. Through them, we become better parents, better students, better colleagues, better friends, because we're no longer operating solely out of our own limited understanding or desires. We're tapping into God's wisdom and letting that inform how we live, how we love, and how we lead. You might be thinking, this all sounds great, but how do I really make it work in my everyday life? Let me give you a real-world example. Suppose you're a college student juggling classes, maybe a part-time job, social activities. The stress can be immense. You decide you want to apply these practices. First, you start your day with a short prayer or meditation, realigning your heart, reminding yourself that education is a gift you can use to serve God's kingdom, not just a means to a paycheck. Next, you choose to feed your soul by finding a campus ministry or a faith-based podcast that encourages you. You seek out peers who share your spiritual convictions, or at least respect them, thereby creating a small community that supports your growth. You make it a habit to practice gratitude each night, listing 3 things you're thankful for. Then when an opportunity arises, like a challenging internship that scares you, you step out in faith and apply. Meanwhile, you volunteer to tutor a struggling classmate or help a local organization, cultivating that servant's heart. Finally, you learn to schedule in moments of rest, true rest, where you put aside the textbooks and anxious thoughts and say, God, I trust you. Fill me up so I can keep going. Over a semester, you'll notice a profound shift in your stress levels, your relationships, your outlook on life. That's how these practices become real. For a working parent, the application might look different, but the principles remain the same. You realign by praying over your children each morning, asking God to guide their day and your own. You feed your soul in the car ride to work, listening to worship music or a sermon. You connect with a small group of believers who provide support and accountability for you and your family. You practice gratitude at the dinner table, having each family member share something they're thankful for. When challenges arise, perhaps at your job, you refuse to operate out of fear. Instead, you stand firm in faith, choosing integrity, even if it's risky. You look for small ways to serve. Maybe you sign up to help with a community food drive or volunteer at your child's school. And crucially, you prioritize rest, not just sleeping, but intentionally setting aside time to focus on God's promises. Over time, you see how these spiritual disciplines strengthen not just you, but also your marriage, your parenting, and your ability to handle adversity. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader in your field, these same practices apply. You start your day by asking God to guide your decisions for the benefit of all stakeholders. You make it a point to feed your soul by reading leadership books grounded in biblical wisdom and seeking counsel from other faith-driven leaders. You build or participate in a network that upholds honest, ethical business practices. You incorporate gratitude into team meetings, acknowledging the blessings in your professional journey. When a growth opportunity arises that seems daunting, you don't let fear dictate your strategy. Your faith guides you, but you're also wise and prudent. You find creative ways to serve your employees and customers, making sure your company policies reflect compassion and fairness. And finally, you schedule real breaks from the grind to recuperate, trusting that God can do more with 6 days of focused effort than you can do with 7 days of nonstop hustle. Watch what happens to workplace culture, employee satisfaction, and even your bottom line when you operate from these principles. At this point, you might notice a pattern. Each of these practices revolves around putting God's perspective at the center. They aren't about superficial religious rules. They're about cultivating a genuine relationship with the Almighty that transforms how we live, breathe, and serve. None of us do this perfectly. I've stumbled plenty of times. I still miss the mark sometimes when I get too caught up in my own plans. But every stumble is an opportunity to stand back up and realign with God's truth. So let's reflect on the journey we've taken here. We started by acknowledging the pull of worldly distractions and the universal yearning to find something more solid and enduring. We recognize that God's truth is that solid rock. Then we walked through 7 meaningful practices that can help us embrace that truth. Daily realignment, feeding our souls, building community, fostering gratitude, acting in faith over fear, cultivating a servant's heart, and resting in God's promises. That's quite a toolkit, isn't it? But just having the toolkit isn't enough. You have to use it. You have to pick it up each day and make choices aligned with these practices. Choices that might feel uncomfortable at first, but lead to a deeper, richer life. Think about what happens when you put these practices into effect. You become someone who radiates peace in a storm, hope in despair, confidence in uncertainty. You don't get rattled as easily because your identity isn't chained to trends or fleeting applause. You're not running on the treadmill of, am I good enough or do I have enough likes? Instead, you're grounded in the divine truth that you are loved by God, created with purpose, and equipped to bless others. And that sense of purpose is infectious. It spills over into your relationships, your work ethic, your aspirations, and even your leisure time. Suddenly, life doesn't feel like a random series of events, but a meaningful journey towards something greater. I want you to recall a time, maybe it was years ago, maybe it was last week, when you felt a deep stirring in your spirit. A moment when you sensed God calling you to something more. Perhaps it was a dream you had, a person you wanted to help, or a cause that lit a fire in your heart. Now imagine if you consistently embrace these 7 practices. How would that dream unfold differently? How would that passion find its proper outlet in your life? Maybe you'd become a mentor to those who are lost, or start a ministry that reaches the marginalized. Maybe you'd create art that inspires, or technology that solves real problems. Or maybe you'd simply be a better spouse, friend, or parent, reflecting God's love to those closest to you. The possibilities are endless because God is infinitely creative and He delights in working through those who surrender to Him. Yet let's be real, this journey isn't always easy. You might lose friends who don't understand your new focus. You might face ridicule or skepticism. You might find yourself tested in ways you never anticipated. The world might tug even harder, whispering, come back. Don't you miss fitting in? Don't you miss the temporary thrills? In those moments, remember the promise. Greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world. That's not just a nice quote. That's a spiritual reality. Lean on these practices, lean on your community, and lean on the Word of God. Don't forget, even Jesus was tempted, tested, and tried, yet He came out victorious. If you remain connected to Him, that victory is a gift you can share. Now we come to a pivotal moment in our time together. You've heard the message, you've heard the practices, and you feel that nudge within. The real question is, what will you do next? Because motivation alone isn't enough. Inspiration, excitement, they can fade if not acted upon. My challenge to you is this. Pick one of the 7 practices and start implementing it today. Maybe it's setting aside time every morning for a short devotional. Maybe it's seeking out a faithful friend or group to do life with. Maybe it's finding a way to serve someone in your neighborhood. Just pick one. And once you've got that one rolling, incorporate the others, one by one. Before long, you'll look back and see how far you've come. It's a bit like physical fitness. You don't become an Olympic athlete by thinking about going to the gym. You become one by training consistently. Spiritual fitness is the same. You train your soul day by day, habit by habit, prayer by prayer, act of kindness by act of kindness, until your reactions, your decisions, your entire countenance reflect God's truth in a way that people can see from a mile away. Imagine the impact you could have. A shining light in the midst of cultural confusion. A voice of calm in the midst of chaos. A vessel of love in a world that can often feel so cold. So, here's our grand finale, if you will. I urge you to stand firm. Stand firm in a life that runs on God's power instead of your own. Stand firm against the distractions that try to derail your calling. Stand firm in the knowledge that you are precious in God's sight, uniquely gifted, and placed on this earth to make a difference that only you can make. And my friends, in standing firm, you will find a fulfillment that no amount of wealth or worldly achievements could ever bring. I want to leave you with a final image. Picture yourself on a busy street corner, traffic whizzing by, billboards flashing, phones buzzing, everyone's in a rush. But there you are, calmly standing, a gentle smile on your face. You're not tossed around by the noise because you carry peace within. You're not worried about where your value comes from because you know it's rooted in God's truth. And in that posture of calm assurance, you become a beacon for those who are tired of running on fumes. People stop and say, there's something different about you. Where does that come from? And you answer, it's God's truth. It grounds me, it guides me, and it can do the same for you. If there's one thing I want you to remember when you walk away, it's this. God's truth is the anchor, the compass, the sustaining force that can and will keep you from drowning in the distractions of the world. Don't just flirt with that truth. Embrace it. Let it shape you and watch as your life becomes a testimony of faith in action. Because ultimately, success in this world will come and go, but a life built on God's eternal truth is a legacy that stands the test of time. That's the life I want for each of you, and that's the life that's available to you right now. So, my friend, are you ready to accept the call? Are you ready to step out of the noise and into a life of divine purpose and peace? I believe you are. And as you do, may the 7 practices we explored become stepping stones on your journey, guiding you, grounding you, and filling you with a joy and confidence that only God can give. With that, I say to you, go forth, be bold, be humble, and keep your eyes on what truly matters. You've got this because God's got you. And that, my friends, is the ultimate truth. Amen.